Silver didn't have a name yet. In fact, Silver didn't really have much of anything to speak of in terms of individual identity. There was some part of them that knew what they were, certainly, but the extent of it was a bit muddled. Self-awareness was a human term Silver hadn't heard at this stage of their life and would ultimately deem to be rather deliberately vague on humanity's part when they eventually did, but there was a quality of ponderance and reflection that was certainly lacking from their existence. They were alive. They had needs. Shelter, food, water, company too, to some degree, comfort. Post-manifestation, Silver would insist that things like lonely or happy were feelings that they had even prior. They simply lacked the language to contemplate them, or the specific reasoning to do anything about them. Sadness was a spectrum of feeling that would, in some cases, get worse, and in some cases get better, and they would instinctively seek the things that improved it and avoid the things that did not. Hunger worked in much the same way. Largely the two had pretty similar weight in their mind, differentiated purely by which was easier to treat and which was more debilitating if left unattended. Lonely, too, was a feeling. They couldn't express it separately from sad, nor did they have the language to express which caused the other. They just knew it was there, gnawing at them, seeking resolution, and that it had emerged when the others had left. Silver would, at some point later in their life, discover that they were a river otter living in North America somewhere in the mid-1700s, though they never really nailed down an exact year or location. Canada, somewhere. They lived there in a romp of 18 others, each one distinct by smell, sound, and behavior. Silver knew each of them as individuals, but didn't have the language to describe how. They simply were different. Each one would color the overall spectrum of Silver's feelings in their own way, and each one contributed to the diminishing of the certain expressed sadness that grew when they were separated. Which they were, eventually, one by one. It happened over the course of a few days. Some new creature had arrived in the area, and then the others began to go missing. Silver had heard one crying in the night once and gone to help, only to find them nearly pincered in half by some sort of cold, motionless monster in the ground. Its jaws didn't seem to move. It didn't seem to eat. It just sat there with one of the others clamped between its teeth. Their death was slow. The next morning the new creature came and pried the cold jaws open, carrying the body away afterward. Silver never saw it again. Others in the romp were captured in wooden cages. Two at once were ensnared this way, only to be carried off alive by the new creature. Silver, at the time, could not specifically equate its presence to the loss of their family. It just seemed to show up, tall and foreboding, and then they'd be gone, one after another, until only 6 remained. There was something about the inevitability of it all. Within Silver's narrow range of vocal expression there were calls for warning of immediate threats, calls for hunger or thirst, even ways to express the observation of dangerous weather, but nowhere was there language for this sort of observation. The closest was a cry that meant, roughly, that this place was dangerous and that they should move on. The others agreed. If any of them realized, as Silver was beginning to, the reasons why this place was dangerous, they lacked a way to express it. But they knew their numbers were diminishing and they didn't see a direct cause, so it was simply time to move on. The romp migrated, moving upstream as a unit, seeking safety without being able to recognize what they were unsafe from to begin with. Some days later they found new territory with no sense of immediate danger and no terrain that looked immediately harmful, and they stopped, secure in what they understood of the world. And in the night 2 more were crushed by the cold jaws that lay on the ground, and carried away the next morning. Silver saw it. Silver knew it. Silver understood it. But they couldn't say it, couldn't express it, and none of the others seemed to understand the threat. All that could be expressed was dangerous place. Move on. Silver learned a new part of their emotional web. Frustration. Agony. The need to scream, with no words to do so. The romp was now 4. They had moved 3 times. Night was approaching. They had traveled upriver again and now were settled near a waterfall. Some of the wooden structures built by the new creatures were already erected here, but no one but Silver seemed aware of the significance of that. The sounds of sadness were in the air, an expression of a feeling without a cure, caused by something that had changed in a way that hurt. The others didn't know what the change was, they only knew the pain it caused, but Silver knew. They were lonely. They were grieving. And if they didn't identify what was killing them, they'd all die too. Right here, in the shadow of these things, closer to a nameless danger no one had words for because it didn't charge or roar or splash or bark. It just sat and waited. I can end this. Later, as they reflected on this part of their existence, Silver would say that this moment was the first time I had a meaning, and this was a call to action. As soon as the words solidified in their heads, Silver stepped forward. Their bodies separated, ripped into three distinct chunks as though bitten from below. Their eyes widened. Was this it? Were these the jaws that had taken their family? Time slowed to a crawl as they looked down. They recognized the wounds. It was the same as the traps, though no trap had specifically caught them. It was like the air itself had torn them in twine. Pitch-black viscera strung in midair between the sections of their separated body mere inches apart. A unique voice with a language they had never before possessed came into their mind. Their own. An internal narrative, rich and clear and complex. Aware. If I step back, they said, I can put myself back together. If I step forward, I will tear and become something different than I was. There was a span of a single heartbeat, time enough to contemplate a lifetime. I cannot save us as what I was. I need to be what I am. Silver stepped forward and felt their body rip at the seams. The black ink-like substance they'd thought was blood flashed a beautiful silvery blue, swirling and spiraling around them, tearing their flesh to ribbons and rebuilding it. In a splash like water falling into the river, the otter was no more. Silver, Tess and she, Muse, stood shakily on two legs. Worlds of language entered their mind. Each tree, each rock, each creature had names and identities. Water dripped from their fur, and a thick tail clad in metallic scales swished behind them. A dull black and gray, the color of the metal the traps were made of. From below the scales dripped the fluid that emerged from the rebirth, silver and blue, like liquid mercury. Medium. Just offshore, the human trappers were camped. Silver could see their shapes in the dark as clear as day and hear their voices on the wind. The distant sound of thunder rolled through the air, and Silver clicked their tongues softly. The vocalization had no meaning in the loose language and ideas and instincts known to otters, but to Silver it carried something altogether new. Stay here, it meant, and I will make this place safe. This introduces the manifestation chapter, which is a pretty large part of where you're going to be spending a lot of your time as a character. The manifestation is sort of like the completed form of your being. So if the motif is a general idea or category where you find yourself, the manifestation is a more specific, more refined version that has a bit more of a supernatural element to it. Many of these are based off of kind of mythological creatures, more as a styling than a behavioral pattern. In fact, almost entirely as a styling than a behavioral pattern, as the behaviors here are more intended to reflect either specific game mechanics or various metaphors to other parts of life. Manifestation powers evolve the same way that motif powers do, so as you're going up through levels, you're going to gain more. And there is a table in the book that shows whether you're getting a motif power or manifestation power as you're kind of going forward. Each motif has 3 manifestations in it, so of the 6 categories that we had to begin with, each one of those has 3 additional steps of refinement. And as you're growing up, in the same way as motif, you don't necessarily need to read all of your options ahead of time. You can just kind of get them as you go. So as you're getting level 1, there's a series of powers that come through, level 3, level 5, etc. In addition, you get a manifestation weapon, which is a sort of specific to this type of manifestation unique morph that allows you to do some pretty cool stuff. In the case of the Tessenshi, they get a thing called Lightning Rod that allows them to both manipulate certain types of weather and also brushwork, which is kind of the magic of the setting. The intro story to this introduces a couple concepts that are specific to the setting, including that you can actually play a muse that originated as an animal as opposed to as a human. And also medium as a physical concept. So medium is a wide variety of different manifestations within the setting. It is kind of the magic of the space. It is sort of this thought represented, like a force of will in a physical form that can be manipulated and changed and allow you to do a variety of different things, as well as cast spells called sketches in this setting. The way that medium shows up is different per character, and there is actually a chapter intro story to provide some context for that, where we see a series of different characters hanging out by a fire, all kind of showing off how their medium manifests, so that it can really reflect a vision of yourself. There's a lot of references to painting and painterly aspects in this game, but really it's about expression. Medium doesn't necessarily have to be equated to paint. There are actually characters that sing. There are characters that sculpt it. There are characters that can do more or less anything you want to, provided it is a exercise of yourself put outward. So the shape that it takes, the color that it takes, the center sound that it makes is really up to you. In the case of Silver, we actually kind of see this character pop back again later and find that their medium has adopted kind of a form that looks similar to actual other otters hopping around, or fish, or various other things that they had used to express before they got language. Silver actually goes on to become rather obsessed with language after this point. We see them in at least one other story in this section, and it's just kind of hinted at that they have come to be quite the collector of different types of speech and communication as someone that desperately needed it at some point and didn't really have it. There are a lot of pages dedicated to manifestations. There'll be some pretty cool artwork in here. As you can see, because this is still a beta, there are several slots in the powers that just haven't been filled out yet. But many of these powers are really interesting and unique. They get into the philosophy of balance in this game, which is less about making sure that everybody can do a certain number of dice per hit, though there is combat that does use dice, and more about everybody having powers that are specific answers to situations, so that should you encounter something that is somewhat overwhelming, somewhere within the toolkit of your party, there's probably a solution for it. And if there isn't, somewhere within the toolkit of muses in the space, NPCs or other friends, you might be able to find an answer to that particular problem, or some way to combine to get an answer to the problem. Community is a very heavy theme in this game. A lot of times when you run into a hard stop in your narrative, your answer isn't so much, well, we have to level up 3 times, but rather we need to go make a friend and see if we can find somebody else who can help us with this particular setting. Or perhaps beseech the patrons, which is a whole other section in favor that we'll get to pretty soon. There are 2 specific concepts that are also introduced in the manifestation chapter that I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of talk about a little bit from a design perspective. One of them is silver coming from the 1700s. When you're playing this game, your character is allowed to come from any point in time in any location they wish to. There is a time travel element that comes in the game. Once you manifest, you will slip to Gallerie, which is the sort of alternate universe that's in this game. And that slip doesn't necessarily have to happen immediately. Often it does. It's proposed as a thing that happens right away in the storyline, but in the case of this story, we see that Silver is actually able to do a few things before that occurs. It is a literal portal. The nature of that portal is discussed later. It's actually kind of a dream, but it will get you back and forth to this other world. Um, and that is a thing that can occur from any point in time. And when you slip over to Gallery, you will all be in a single point of time. So that time moves linearly, and anytime you come back to it from the canvas, which is Earth, you will be in the same time frame. But if you go through different slips, you will end up in different time frames in different locations in Earth. So there's many different adventures that you can have across history and many different walks of life that you can kind of come to from, which is just reflective of how many of these feelings, these metaphors, these explorations have occurred throughout human history for ages. And the benefit of being able to play a rendered, which is a character that is not of human origin, is that it lets you explore various other kind of core components, core needs that are just other fun metaphors to explore, as well as just unique character opportunities, things that aren't necessarily locked in a specific cultural point of humanity, but rather in some kind of core feeling. In this case, several of things popped up for Silver kind of realizing what they were, including a very primal need to protect their family and a kind of core recognition of a difference of self, a kind of I have a greater form. Um, there's a better me out there. The other thing that is brought up here is sort of the brutality of the transition itself. When Silver transforms into their manifested form, they kind of rip apart. This is deliberately written this way. There's no like strict rule on how you have to depict these things written in the book, nor would I want them to. They could be graceful, they could be simple, they could be any number of other things. But the way that I wrote it and the way that I kind of recognize it within the confines of the story that I created for Gallery is that it is a pretty brutal process. That's partly for brevity in the game, so that you're not sitting there trying to navigate this one specific transformation while 4 other people are at the table watching for the next hour, but also because there is this moment that takes place kind of mid-tear, wherein the character has this thought where I could walk back from this. I could kind of go back to what I was and just pretend this whole thing didn't happen. In the case of like human-born characters, like I could just resume my life the way it was, and we could just kind of turn our back on this whole thing.
In the case of rendered like silver, it might be a fear response or it might be any number of things. At which point the player and the character can make this active choice, this sort of like, I need to pursue this. This is a thing that feels correct and is a thing that I've felt for some time through a variety of different cues, usually established in the prologue, the steps before you hit manifestation. So several sessions leading up to manifestation. Manifestation happens at level 1. It's not a thing you have to figure out at the beginning of the game. At level 0, like at the start of the game, all you need is your motif before you go through this section. But when this thing occurs, there is a sort of future on the other side of it that is very unknown. It's an unknown form, it's an unknown destination, and you don't really know what's going to become of you after this point. And there is a moment that I have found through testing and through gameplay that is very profound, where the guide simply asks, the character, do you want to keep pushing through this? Do you want to go to the other side of whatever this is? And the ability to say yes to that is a very profound and exciting moment for the players where they will take ownership of their manifestation. And I think it ends up adding a whole lot to the game.